Do you like K-pop, or do you just want to see if I get bashed for picking a superior girl group? It's been a while since Celebrity Book Club, and I had to ask myself, Polina, you literally have a whole celebrity book club and you still haven't read like K-pop idols when you read like other celebrities? So today I decided to rectify that mistake by perhaps making an even bigger mistake because K-pop fans can be so brutal. And I will do spoiler-free reviews on some of the book recs that K-pop girl idols from girl groups recommended. I'll do a male version later, but there's just a lot of recs, so I figured I'll split it in like the most basic way I could think of. And I hid special Easter eggs throughout this episode, even though it's not even remotely Easter. I disguised certain song recs in my reviews, so try and guess and let me know in the comments what you got and what you didn't get. Up first, we have a book that said, knock knock, I'm going to make you question your life. And oh dear, it was a self-help book. Cry for me, I do not like self-help books. And I'm sorry twice, you literally posted this on your Instagram. I had no choice. Sorry for bashing Nayeon. Twice songs always give me the feels and make me want to listen to more and more songs every time. But it does not excuse this poor excuse of a book that was just not it. Courage to be Disliked is marketed here in the West as this Japanese genius that's guaranteed to transform your life. And of course it's not the book's choice, but I just like to warn you in advance that there's literally nothing Japanese about it. It concerns Western psychology. It's based on the teachings of Adler, and how it works is basically this Japanese author wrote this book called like Adler Introduction to His Psychology, Psychoanalysis in Japanese, and then this other author saw the book and was like, yeah, I want to collaborate with this first author, let's write the book together. I mean, frankly, I have the courage to be disliked and to just come out and say it right now that if this was winter and I had a paper edition, I would have had no qualms using this book as fuel because it's atrociously written, and maybe it's just a translation, but starting from the very format, which I'll talk about in a second, it's just quite problematic in some of the things it teaches. Although it does have some good advice, it literally denies the existence of any trauma, and that is because, I mean, Adler is old school and he disagreed with Freud. But personally, I just think that there was a whole lot of it's all your fault sort of mentality. And while it's great that this book aims to give people courage to change their lives by themselves, I think it did focus a lot on the part where you decide what you want to do, when that's not always the case. It's formatted as a dialogue between a youth and a philosopher. Of course, right? We're the youth, we're young and inexperienced, and this is the guy who's going to teach us all about our life. I mean, that's how most self-help books work, except it's actually a dialogue. And so the youth says to the philosopher, oh, I disagree with you. I mean, frankly, I'm miserable. Life sucks. I'm in a hard financial situation. I don't have money. I'm like nearly homeless. So how can you say that life is simple? And then the philosopher says, that's interesting, because he doesn't think that anger or even like rebuting someone actively is a positive emotion. So he just acknowledges the point and he says, okay, that's interesting. But life is simple. And then the youth says, yeah, and what's your counterpoint? And then the philosopher says, well, you know, you're the one ultimately controlling everything you do in life, because if you change your outlook, if you unravel all your problems, you'll see that you're the one at the root of your problems. And then the youth says, and then the philosopher says, well, you know, people are very emotional and that's totally normal. People are emotional creatures, but sometimes anger and other emotions get in your way. And I mean, everything is ultimately up to you. Trauma doesn't exist. Trauma is a fake concept. We react to trauma differently. So if you, for example, have agoraphobia, you are just attention seeking and you can decide to leave the house any day. Because notice how the message is good, like you can change your outlook, but some of the other things, calling someone who's agoraphobic and saying that even though the symptoms are valid, the reason for it is not valid and they just don't have enough attention and so they just want their parents' attention, is a very simplistic approach to life. And that's sort of how the dialogue goes in every aspect of this book. We're literally just told, you're seeing it wrong and then this is how it is, and there's no statistics whatsoever, and there's no evidence whatsoever, and we're just supposed to trust this philosopher because he rebuts our point. But the thing is, the youth never actively argues against his points either. The youth just says, but what about this? And it's like a valid point, but then he doesn't expand on it further. To make matters worse, at the end of every chapter, the youth would invariably say either A, oh wow, you changed my life, I completely agree with you, or B, I'll have a think, and then come back 5 days later, be like, I disagree. Then the philosopher would say something else, and he'd just be like, I agree. Like, I think it would have been more interesting if, since you decided to introduce this fictional element, there was at least some semblance of struggle or like not immediate acceptance rather than just 2 chapters later he's converted to Adlerian psychology. Just a little bit random there. I do think it had some good messages, such as don't intervene in other people's business. Like, you can prompt them to do something, but don't intervene. But then again, this sort of does bring back the argument to the trauma. Like, if it's his fault and you're yelling at him to not be courageous and you're also telling people to not intervene. I always feel bad kind of dissing self-help books a bit because there's so many people for who the book genuinely helped. And I just want to say, if you're one of those people, that's great. I'm very happy for you that this book helped you. But in my opinion, it was just not good. So it's a 3 stars from me. Let's power up to a better book rec and talk about Irene from Red Velvet. Her pick got the bad boy fans angry. So feminism is a sensitive topic in Korea. I think I've talked about this before, in the regard that Kim Ji-young, born 1982, it's considered one of the key books of contemporary Korean feminism, one of the first books in the Korean Me Too movement, and it's just honestly a book that concerns some of the issues that women face, such as, for example, like pregnancy and then people not being so positive about the pregnancy, things like this. And when Irene posted that she was reading this book, people got mad. Some of her fans, some of her male fans especially, they said that she betrayed them, that she was being extremely misandrist, and they burned her merchandise. And I just want to make clear right now that, for me at least, feminism is about equality, and I absolutely don't condone misandry in any way. And I would have definitely tried my best to spot the misandry and actually point it out if this book had any. I really genuinely didn't see misandry here. And if you did, by all means, let's engage in a productive conversation about it. I would like to see your point of view. We start with learning that Ji-young had a mental breakdown, that she's not been feeling extremely sane for the last couple of months. And she's talking to her therapist, and we go back in time to see her childhood and to see how it sort of affected where she is right now in life. And there's all sorts of issues explored. So for example, when she was a child, her friend got harassed by a teacher. It wasn't like implications, it was actually physically touching and stuff, which for a young mind is even more traumatic than realizing years later that he was making insinuations because it was a male teacher. And then she sort of went into this whole traumatic trance because of that experience, because he was a guy, and then later when she was in university, this male student stalked her home, and so she kind of went into this really fearful of men as a traumatic response. But she never said that they were evil. She was just scared of them to the point where she avoided her own brother until she had time to heal. So then she healed, she went back to normal, it's okay. She found a husband, she liked him, she married him, and then they had a child. And because she had a child, she asked to come into work an hour later, and she still left work an hour later too, so it wasn't like she was working less. But because of that, her co-workers were very resentful, and they sort of told her, they didn't directly tell her, but they were sort of implying that she was doing nothing, that she was just a waste of company resources. So there was just a lot of problematic stuff there. And because the book focused on, well, the female issues here, because the main character was female, people got angry that it didn't concern male issues. And even though I think it's important to talk about things like the suicide rate and about men not getting a fair treatment in family court, I don't understand the criticism that this book is misandrist just because it didn't talk about those particular issues here. It never once implied that men were somehow worse than women or unequal. So this whole criticism of it being a misandrist book is somewhat lost on me. Just because something focuses on women's issues and doesn't necessarily focus on men's doesn't mean that it's against men. You see, there's just this distinction. But again, I welcome your thoughts. What I think was really interesting was it sort of interspersed fiction and the statistics about Korean society. So it was sort of like a blend of nonfiction and fiction. So it would talk about like the percentage of women working and the percentage of women who quit the workforce after getting pregnant and like things like those issues. And the book was written in third person narration and it was very impartial, but it was so emotional to read. And I think it was just holding that really well. It's guaranteed to make you thoughtful and it's an amazing conversation starter. They weren't yelling necessarily at Ji Young because she was a woman. They were yelling at her because they didn't think that she was efficient. And this is just something that's so important to talk about, like this toxic work culture. And I think it's because Korea is a very capitalist society that doesn't really have any social safety networks, let's say. So it is very important for people to work because they don't have a pension, so it's sort of this bitter feeling. I did really enjoy this book and I gave it an easy 5 stars. So I hope that you will pick it up and decide for yourself whether it's misinterest or all those other things that people called it. Yeah, Mamamoo. So, is it any surprise that the icons who said we'll set our own standards if we don't like societies also picked a feminist book rag like Irene from Red Velvet? So, I think, first of all, it's a very brave choice to post about it, especially seeing the reactions from people. Moonbear said from Mamamoo specifically that she got gifted the book We Should All Be Feminist. So in case you haven't heard of We Should All Be Feminist before, it's adapted from a TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she basically talks about feminism in the 21st century, about things like gender stereotypes and assumptions that people make for her living in Nigeria as a woman and how it differs to her being a black woman in America and in Nigeria. It's not a very long piece of work, like I said, but it does cut straight to the point, and I just think that it's a very good introductory text, especially if you're looking to understand what people think of feminism outside of like those toxic 2015 memes. I actually read this book a while ago, this pamphlet a while ago, and I remember that it made a great impact on me. But now, since then, I've read a few more texts to see the original text, right? And I do think that it's not the most detailed text, obviously, because it's a 30-minute TED Talk, but I genuinely think that it's worth a listen or a read to, whatever you feel comfortable with, because it just really makes it clear what feminism is. And there's a definition here that Chimamanda said. A feminist is a person who believes in the economic, political, and social equality of the sexes. So again, not someone who puts one sex above the other. It's someone who believes in equality. And I think that's just so important to remember, especially as people more and more sadly associate feminism with being like someone who says that women should be elevated and men should be taken down. No, it's not about tearing someone down, it's about lifting someone up. So yeah, I just think it's a very good book in that regard. Bam! It's time for Momoland. Jane recommended Miracles of the Namiya General Store, and it sounded very sappy. Honestly, I thought that I would hate it, because it just sounded like the most emotional thing that's literally manipulating you to get at those emotions, and it's just not great. But things can surprise you because I genuinely love this book so much. It's a great comfort book. It's better than any self-help book, side-eye, and it's literally just free therapy. Like, if you want something serotonin-filled, go for it. These 3 young men who become thieves because of financial circumstances, and then after they rob a car, they decide to hide out from the police, so they get out of the car and they go to this abandoned general store, the Namiya General Store, and they're just sitting there and they're like, okay, we'll just wait a little bit, the police will stop looking for us, then we'll keep going. And then they receive a letter. It's from this young woman who is training for the Olympics, and she's asking for advice because her boyfriend has cancer and he's going to die, and she doesn't know whether she should be spending time with him or she should be training for the Olympics, because he was actually her coach, so he wants her to train for the Olympics, and life is just complicated. They start to engage in correspondence with this athlete, and it turns out that she's actually living in the past, and there's more and more letters asking for advice, and it just genuinely has a plot, and that really made me like it, because a lot of these books who are like emotional before the coffee gets cold vibes, but this book actually had a plot and then like multiple other plots, so it was never boring, and there were a lot of twists. And if you're into this whole theme of like interconnectivity and we're all connected and everything resolved, and it just makes you light up to see people jumping in the past and seeing how time warps around itself and how different people help each other, it's a rec for you. I don't really love the writing style of this book, but I do have a feeling that again, it's the translation. I mean, some things sounded just a little bit stilted, and I have a feeling it was way more like emotional and heart-wrenching in the original. But I mean, the characters still manage to have that sense of vibrancy, and they're all very empathetic, and everyone has their own backstory, and it was just really nice to see how they all fit together at the end. And I mean, knowing that it's a feel-good book, I think you know not to expect like a overly sad ending. It's obvious in that regard. Don't pick this for sad girl summer. Sometimes books come into your life and you don't know what sort of book you're gonna need, but you just realize that that's the book. Like, that's it. That's what I wanted. And at times the pace felt rushed, especially towards the end. The whole book was very like snappy, issue here, issue there, solution here, solution there, crisis, plot twist. But at the end, I do think that it managed to sort itself out very nicely, and it even made me say, like, I like it. I wasn't sure I was gonna like it, but I like it, so thumbs up for me. I'm ending with Blackpink, no matter how you like that. Because, I mean, it doesn't really matter about the order, but I just want to say that it was Blackpink that originally made me stay and listen to more K-pop songs. They really got me listening. I love their songs a lot, and I think it comes to no surprise to anyone that Jisoo is a bookworm. She has recommended books before, and you never know, maybe it's her agents being like, recommend this, you'll sound more intelligent, recommend that. But I checked out her list and I actually read a lot from it right before this video, not on purpose, just because it seems that we have the same taste. And I ended up choosing one specific book to review here because it's actually, I read this the most recently. I read it this year and it turned out to be a new favorite, so I specifically wanted to talk about it. I am sorry for talking about this book for the 12th time if you're a regular subscriber, but it's The Way by Swans by Proust, and ever since I read it, I just cannot stop thinking about it, talking about it, recommending it to anyone. Proust is not for everyone. His writing is very hard to get into because it's quite like one sentence, one page in its style. There's just a lot. But if you love ruminations on time and memory, then I think that this is perfect, because even though his writing is not the easiest, it's brilliant. It transports you. You'll soon find yourself in search of lost time because you can't get back to the present when you're reading this. I mean, it transports you to France, to the story of Marcel. And in case you haven't heard of this long book, it's one of the longest books in the world, but it's split into 7 volumes. That's not an excuse to drop it. I'm looking at you. Semi-autobiographical, so there's a lot of debate as to how much of it is actually made up, how much of it is not. And so it's about Marcel and this young boy and how he's growing up and his relationship with his mother, whom he particularly likes, his grandmother, and then his first love, and how he gets so involved with his neighbor's romance because he just really likes the story. And there's so many beautiful passages on everything. If you're a romantic, it's for you. If you're someone who wants to read a classic that's actually genuinely good, it's for you. If you want to read a book that has writing that you've never heard of or seen or read before that takes your breath away, it's for you. And finally, if you're an aesthete, if you're into aesthetics, there's so many passages on the beauty of music, art, literature, on poetry, and it just gives you the special feeling of reading and feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling like, yes, finally someone understands. This is what hearing a good song or seeing a good painting or reading a good book feels like. If you want an enchanting story, this is for you, and Jisoo is hard carrying Blackpink right now, not going to lie. Even if you don't agree with my final decision and you don't like the fact that I bullied your group And I didn't pick it as the one with the best reading taste. I still hope that you like this video. And it's time to make the announcement. It's between Red Velvet and Blackpink for me. Kim Ji Young is a very necessary book, and I feel like it's way more accessible than Proust because I mean, Proust, come on, Proust is hard to read. I think that sometimes it's not about how many people it can reach, even though I do think both of these books are worth a try. It's also about the quality of general literary excellence overall. And even though I think that Kim Ji Young is a very worthwhile book, and I do hope that you will pick it up anyway, it is Proust for me because I can't in good consciousness not recommend a classic that made me feel like this, because it took me from a Russian winter to a French summer in the span of like, what, 10 pages? And I hope that this book will give you the same feeling, that you like it as much as I did.